KJ Carson and John Lyons right now on WEEI.
No whistle. Hill, knocked down. Tillman. 7.4 to go. Boston by 1.
Oh, that voice is going to be so missed come next season. It's KJ and Lyons, Hour 2 on WEEI, 617-779-7937. Text line 37937. That's Mike Gorman with one of the last amazing regular season calls that we're going to hear. I mean, there are people who could probably tell you what game Gorman was calling as their kid was being born in a hospital. It's just kind of fascinating, John, that we're coming to the end of the road in terms of Mike Gorman. Now, he'll still be available during the playoffs for some of the games, but once next season starts, it's a whole fresh start.
Yeah, and he's been the soundtrack to the Celtics since 1981 when he first started his play-by-play broadcast. I mean, chances are you go to any old game, really, of the last 40 years, any highlight, no matter who the player is, you hear his voice. And I think, such a legendary career, I think it's definitely going to leave a void with the Celtics. I do wish, and this would never happen, but if the Celtics made the finals, if ABC would let him call a game, I think that would be awesome.
Well, contracts.
And I love Mike Breen. I'm a huge Mike Breen fan. Well,
you couldn't do that all of a sudden. Hey, like we're now in the finals, and you'd have to do it for the other team as well.
Does the other team have a legendary 43-year announcer retiring? Because if they do, maybe. All right.
Well, maybe not. Maybe their team is only probably they could be an ABA merger team that's only been around since 75. But my point being is I think if the Celtics win 18, I think things kind of get blown up, and I think there's and I don't have any prior knowledge, or I'm not leaking anything out of the bag. But understanding how this business works, there's probably a play for Max and Grande to come back.
I was surprised.
And Drew Carter gets a national deal that he can't refuse.
I was surprised Grande and Max weren't the heir apparent TV voices when it was announced Mike Gorman was going to retire. And I think Drew Carter's been fine. Nothing against him. It's just Grande and Max have been on the radio together.
He's not born here. That's what it is.
Well, but Grande and Max have been on there since
I know.
2002. So they've been on a long time. They do a great job together, and occasionally they've done TV games, fill-ins here and there, and I think some preseason work over the years. So they've done it before. They've obviously been together for a very long time and done a terrific job. I was really surprised that they weren't the original picks. I wonder if maybe they.
I'm not surprised. And it has nothing to do with them. It's called the David Lee Roth theory in this industry. I'm going to school you. When Howard Stern came off of terrestrial, they had to find someone to replace him. So right away they were like, let's go to David Lee Roth. David Lee Roth, was bad. I'm not saying that's the case with Drew Carter, but you kind of put somebody in there to separate the buffer, because if you come on right after the legend who's been there, it can be kind of tough. Even for the person, some people might say, man, Mike Gorman was so calming to my spirit that I would leave the TV on and it would help me get to bed. Not saying he would put you to sleep, but just the whole idea of the comfort level, right? And so while you may be known, people are trying to compare to the comfort level, because let's just call it what it is. Everybody wasn't jumping on the Drew fan page right away when he started. And I think in part of it, because they're thinking this is the guy that's going to replace Gorman. So I think Drew's done such a good job, right? And this isn't his hometown. That's the other play, that he's going to get an offer to go national. And then you win 18. Now you're starting, your packages look differently when you go out to the salespeople. People you're learning an inside media job here. You're now going to be able to sell Max, who's on that 81 championship team, through, I think, but up to the team he was gone by 86. He had been traded to LA.
He won the finals MVP in 84, right?
Right. Yeah. So he's on that 80. He's a young guy on that 81 team with Bird. You've got Grande, who's been calling games in some capacity since he's come back here from the Timberwolves. You keep Scal as the number 3 guy who's been just the classic court jester. And then you have Eddie House, who's tied to the 08 team, who can then be that guy who's been from live from satellite, kind of a Kendrick Perkins type. And now you have really the makings of probably something that competes with the EJ, Shaq, Charles Barkley, and Kenny Smith that you have on TNT for the Celtics as you're celebrating winning 18. Because I think that, and I think this ties to the Jason Tatum story as well, is if the Celtics win 18 this year, Jason Tatum will be the lead runner for MVP next year. And then you will get back to what a lot of people have hoped for, is the Celtics to be the national conversation of a team the way that the Lakers seem to have consistently been. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. And speaking about it, you mentioned Eddie House. He did the broadcast down in Atlanta. I thought he was awesome. Like, I would – more time for him, I would support. And I know he does a great job on pregame and postgame, but even during games, here and there, even just as a fill-in sometimes, like, I thought he was terrific in those games down in Atlanta. So
can I do like behind-the-scenes flex here? So my college roommate is in charge of hiring throughout NBC Universal. Right, like one day I got a text. He's like, "Hey, I'm here in Boston." I was just like, "Hey, did you run in this guy?" He said he had glasses on and everything. I was like, "Yeah, that's him." He's like, "Oh yeah, I had a conversation with him for a second. That's my classmate." I think they're going to say, "How do we use the Celtics template to use for other teams across the country for these other NBC sports situations that they have?" And I think the Celtics will be the perfect test because the advertising community is going to pour in money to have their brand slapped with the 18th championship logo. I'm just giving you some inside business. Yeah. Hell, Mike and Ken might say, KJ, you want to work in the sales department too? But these are the things that you have to think out. Like, because you're not going to have a Mike Gorman there that's been there since 81 anymore, you can now have something that ties you to a familiar voice in Grande and then all these other pieces, Maxwell to the 80s, Scal as a player into the late 90s, into the early 2000s, mid-2000s. House with the 2008 team. You probably rotate people like Paul Pearson to come in and hang out. All these things will be at your avail, and you don't have to worry about replacing a celebrity as much as you're looking at, hey, we've got a very entertaining show that goes along with the world champions that are out on the court.
And it's really interesting because, like, I go back to, like, when Nesson moved on from Don Orsillo, replaced him with Dave O'Brien. Like, that was met with a lot of anger. And I think Don Orsillo's awesome. I wish they hadn't moved on.
I think he still has a little bit of thing in his chest about that.
Yeah, I don't
see
blame
some
him.
of his posts.
I don't blame him, to be honest. But, like, it's really difficult to be the next guy. Like, no matter how good Dave O'Brien is or isn't, like, you're coming after Don Orsillo. It's not easy. Like, no matter how good Drew Carter is or isn't, it's extremely difficult to come after Mike Gorman. You look at Gil Santos to Bob Sochi. Like, that worked because Bob is awesome. But it's a very difficult thing to do, to go to, and that's a whole sports thing too.
It's a tough
like,
this is
to be
a
the
tough
guy
town.
and to be the guy after a legend in anything is extremely. I mean, look at Gerard Mayo coming after Bill Belichick. Like, it's an extremely difficult thing. But to be the guy that comes after the legend in anything, it's extremely difficult. And I think that's where the Celtics TV kind of find themselves, and that's why, to me, Grande and Max are in such an interesting spot, because I think, like you mentioned, the comfort level thing with Gorman, they're guys that if they slid in, people would be comfortable with them right away. And I think that's one of the reasons the Celtics have had Drew Carter do so many games on the road this year, partly because Gorman wasn't going to do them, but also now at least he builds a comfort level to some degree heading into next year if he doesn't get that national offer that you mentioned.
KJ Lyons, WEEI, 617-779-7937, text line 37937. Grande could work, right? I think he would work, right? Because he's been the other voice. Think about it. How many voices have there been associated with the Celtics over the last 50, 60 years?
Yeah, it's really two, mainly. Him and Tommy Heinsohn. And I know they've had others, but like when you think
Johnny Most, you go back to Johnny Most before that.
Yeah, like when you think of Celtics basketball since 1980, 44 years, like you think of Gorman and Heinsohn, essentially. And I know there's other guys in there that have done well, but like those are the two guys that you think of when you think of Celtics basketball for 4 decades now. Like it's incredible accomplishment by Gorman. It's a great. I mean, I didn't realize this when I was doing some research before the show. He's won 5 Emmys. KJ, first of all, I think it should be more than that, but like 5 Emmys, that's crazy.
I've been nominated for one. We didn't win, but
you should have. You should have.
No, I understand why we didn't win. I forgot who we lost to. But
yeah, I'm still going to support.
I was an editor for Black College Sports Today. But look. I think that's the other thing. This is a tough town, and I did a morning show for another station. I kind of had to coach up people like, look, this is how it flows here. Trust me when I tell you. So. I think it's like, what's familiar? What do I know? What will make me enjoy myself versus someone who feels like they're trying to get their resume off. That would be the turnoff, right? Like, and I think, and this is not what Drew comes off of, but I think that because people will throw the Syracuse thing, right? Yeah. And in this industry, when you talk about a Syracuse guy, it's almost kind of like everybody's doing their impression of Marv or Ken Albert, like, I'm live from New York, So that's that people kind of rub that a different way, right? Because, you're from that Syracuse factory. And look, it's a tough thing to step in for Drew, but there's just a piece of me that feels like, hey, you did this. Somebody's probably got a great offer for you at National. You almost don't refuse it because you don't want to go into 3 years, 5 years, and so forth. Because Drew has made some. You remember the situation that went down with it? Drew made that joke about Eddie House, and Eddie House wasn't really thrilled about it. And it was like, so when you have situations like that, you're like, we need it a little more comfortable in here, especially if we're going to start upcharging on the cost for ads with the team wins 18. But again, this is all predicated on winning the championship, because if the team doesn't win the championship, then I don't think you roll out this just kind of like semi-comedic, enjoyable, entertaining situation where now you got the fans who are kind of like this team is never going to win it.
The other side of this, though, like when Gorman started in 81, and maybe you know this better than me, he wasn't a hugely known commodity. So like they might look at Drew Carter as that. Like he's going to be a guy that's going to be here for 30 or 40 years, and we'll be doing a show 40 years from now when he's done, and we'll be talking about how he's a legend too. Well,
at that time, they're coming out of kind of like a purgatory, if you will. The Celtics were. There was
the whole NBA was.
The Wicks and Rowe, Havlicek's career was ending, and so things were kind of changing, and you didn't know where the franchise was going. You felt that it was going to be going in the right direction once you drafted Bird, and even though Bird sat out a year, you felt like, okay, the future was coming. That's when you hire. So you usually, you hire when there's opportunity, when things aren't looking very well. That's when you go and get somebody that nobody expects, and you can roll with them for 40 years. And because think about it, Gorman, through all those years, really the first 5 years were the glory years, man. I would love to sit and have a drink with him, like, so tell me about it, what it was like doing those Patino year games.
Yeah, I know. But even that, like, and this is a credit to him, like, the Celtics had some bad teams over the last 40 years, and he would make those games exciting. Like, I like the 06-07 Celtics, they had that 18-game losing streak. They ended up with the 5th overall pick in the draft before they traded for Ray Allen. They were awful. And he still made even some of those games entertaining and fun and that you wanted to watch. I mean, that's a special amount of skill right there. If you can get somebody excited about a Celtics game in January of 2007, that's a special skill to have there.
Well, beer does the same thing for you, too. 617-779-7937, text line 37937. We continue the Celtics talk about what it might look like in the playoffs. Plus, we still have Would You Rather More Likely to Either Or, WrestleMania Night 1, the NCAA Final Four is going on right now. Plenty still happening, but right now it's time to trend with John Lyons.